It is my privilege and joy that we can have this seminar about education. It is one, I believe, of most importance to know how not only to raise a child on long term, but also how the child can be influenced even in a short-term way. Usually, education is something that needs time. And time needs also knowledge. Because what can we do with time and no knowledge? So we need both. For education, you need time and you need knowledge. And sometimes it is so that both of them are lacking. And if both of them are lacking, then where will that end, that project of education? If the parent is ignorant and has no time, how shall that work? For this reason, I also decided to make this seminar a 6 presentation session, not only a 3-1, because I want to not go fast over this most important subject, but to allow time to present information that can be put into practice and bring, I believe, great results. So, children. Children are the most, I would say, interesting beings that we have on earth. They are sweet, they are fantastic, and I would love to be always occupied in raising children. Maybe I do this because I haven't had so much time to raise little children. We only had the privilege to raise, or to have for a time, 6 foster children. The youngest was 7, the oldest was 17. So they were not yet young. But in my practice as an ENT, I had a lady that worked there for me, and she got married and got a child. And when the child was 1 year old, she came back to practice, and she wanted to do her job. And I said, but your child needs you at home. But she said, no, we bought a house and we need to come, I need to come to work. So I said, let's do a deal. I take you back to work and you bring your child, and since my practice has enough rooms, I said, we make 1 room for the child and we raise this child here together. And so I had the privilege to raise for 2.5 years a child from the age of 1 year till he was 3.5. And last year only, one of our foster daughters got her 2nd child, and while she lived close to my practice, I could experience to see from the beginning how a child and a mother behave and how they develop. And I must say I fell in love with children. They are really something that if we just know how to deal with them, it would be a fantastic relationship. But for this, we need to know a little bit, or maybe a little bit more, about the human being and how it works. In the beginning, we need to know what is education. And I would say, as a general title, it is the driver's license for life. As we all learn to drive a car, sooner or later, every human being has no choice. He must drive his life. No one can intervene and do and put his hand in his steering wheel. Because that steering wheel is not an outside factor, it's an inside thing, and no one has access to that steering wheel except the individual himself. That's why to educate a child is to help him to learn how to drive his life. Unfortunately, because of ignorance, and we'll see of great error in the human mind, parents try to drive their children's life, which from the beginning is a mistake because it's impossible. And so in the moment that the parent wants to put his hand in the steering wheel of the child, that gets into a conflict. Because even though the parent cannot put the hand in the steering wheel of the child, in his way of seeing things, wants to avoid that. And then it gets confused and it gets in opposition. And you see, a child opposes to the putting hand on the parents in its own steering wheel, even though it's not possible, but they try from the very beginning to be very old. I mean, I see it in my life. I'm now 56 years old, and my mother is living with us since almost 2 years, and I must observe that she still wants to put her hand on my steering wheel in my life. She might know to drive my life better than I know to drive it, but it's impossible. But anytime I try to tell my mom, I'm driving myself alone, don't worry about me, I'm getting into a conflict. And that's not very healthy. So let's put the principle from the beginning. The law of individuality does not permit, and it makes it impossible, that one should drive the life of another one. Everyone can only drive his life himself. No one can intervene to do it for him. That's why education becomes so important, to help the not so experienced child in matters of life, how to do it. But for this, the parents must know how to drive their life themselves. If they don't know it, then how can they help the child to drive? So if a parent is unable to control himself, then how can he give and show how control works in the life of a child? So we'll speak more about that. Let's look to the 3 fundamentals of education. We must know why we need education, why a child needs education, why and what needs to be educated, and of course, how to do it. The why is the purpose. There is nothing in this world that does not serve a purpose. So we must know, for what purpose do we raise a child and want to help him to drive his own car? And then we must know the what. What is the content that must be transmitted, that must be learned by the child, so that the purpose can be fulfilled? Because the content is just a means for the purpose. And then, of course, we need a method how to do it. Now, the seminar will go through all of them, and we will concentrate, of course, of the what of the contents with the purpose, and also touch some of the method. But the method is something that we all need to understand is individual. It's not general. While purpose and content are general, there is no general method for anything. It never is. If method would be a general thing, learning would be impossible. Because we learn by trying things out. We use this method or that approach and the other approach, and so we are able to add to how to transmit things. But method is something that must be learned. It's individual. That's why I don't go so much into methods. But unfortunately, when we look to the education literature, the method looks like to be in the center. But that is not physiological to the human being. And that is opposite to whole nature's laws. That someone want to put his method of education on the other one. So let us not be confused. Purpose and content, the why and the what, is general. It's principles. The how is always individual. And let us not get confused, because we will see in most cases we switch. We put that which is not important as important, and that which is less important becomes central. And I believe today that since method is something practical, and we are all very practical oriented, we believe that method must be central. No, in all this, my experience with the children, but also with my patient and understanding more and more of humanity, I know that method is individual. I must address this case in this way, and that child in that way, and the other child in the other way, while I have to bring to them the same purpose and the same content, the same principles of education. So we'll put that into center, what is general. So what is a child supposed to learn in order to master his life successfully? You see, this poor guy needs to carry a lot of books. And sometimes I choose this kind of a picture to show that it's not very physiological. It's not the way we were made, that we should carry a bookload. Yes, we need knowledge. But what kind of a knowledge? And we will see there are two types of a knowledge that exist out there. And the one is the self-explanatory knowledge, which you go into it, you must learn it, but it explains itself. Those are the laws of nature, the object, and even to look into yourself. So understanding oneself is one of the most important things. I have to tell my patient almost every day when they come to me with their affections, to tell them that no one taught us how we work. No one taught us to understand ourselves. We learn all kinds of things in school. We learn all kinds of things to do, but to learn how we ourselves work is total ignorance. While that should be central in the understanding of ourselves. How can I drive my own car if I don't know where the buttons are, if I don't know where the steering wheel is? How can I do that? I will always land somewhere in the ditch. So we must understand those things that are self-evident. And the way we work is self-evident. But we need to take time to look how those things works. And then the second kind of information, and unfortunately this is the most fulfilling place in school. It's literature, studies, all kinds of things. But this kind of information requires and needs interpretation. For this you need some skills, you need some methods, to need some ground information to know how to interpret what you read, what you study, how that works. So that is that knowledge that we also need, but we will see it is that is compared to the self-evident knowledge, we just put emphasis on that what we interpret. And we don't see that interpretation is subjective, and so everyone can do whatever he wants, or it goes into nowhere if you don't have that knowledge that never changes, that cannot be changed by interpretation, and that is the self-evident knowledge. So knowledge is important. We'll speak more about that. And then, of course, we want to develop abilities. What should a child be able to do? It should read, it should write, it should bake and cook and organize, it should play an instrument or sports, it should do some exercise, it should know how to work, but most of all, it should know how to control itself. If there's something in our abilities to learn, it is how to control ourselves. But how can a parent teach self-control if the parent doesn't know how that behaves? A mother once called me. She had not even a 2-year-old child, and the child was aggressive. That is, the child give beats to its mom. And then the mother said, "Why does the child beat me? Why is he aggressive towards me?" I said, "Look, the child's lack of self-control is due to what happens in you. And you must observe, whenever you lose your self-control, your child will, like an effect of what you do, react." And I asked her, how often does she get out of her control? When the husband says something or something happens there. So how can I teach a child self-control? And then some mothers who is a Christian mother, she then takes the child and goes and prays. And said, and how does the child behave? Well, it gets more aggressive when I go to pray with it. And then some Christian people will think, oh yes, the devil comes, and then they go and pray even more. It doesn't work. It's an abuse of prayer. It's an abuse of something that should be used in the right way. So we must know how, from where arises the not capacity of self-control, and how to do that. And how shall a mother teach that if she doesn't have it, or a father? So children are they are so paying attention to what the parents do that you can tell from their behavior how the life of the parents are. Now, of course, there are also self-control looking children, who have no self-control. They're just smart enough to not get into conflict. And that could also be something that is very dangerous. Do you think that your child is very behaving, very nice, but in the end, it just plays games with you because it has understood how to go beside you, to how can I say, fool you. So we must look, and if you want to check if something really has brought in your education of self-control, you must put the child, you must expose him to things where he must lose his control so that you can see, is that a self-control that is just there when I am there because they fear certain circumstances, certain consequences, or is it a really inside thing? So no matter if I'm there or not, the child has learned a lesson because I also, as a parent, learned the lesson. And then, of course, we need to show the child a certain behavior. But we will see behavior is a result, is an effect of something that goes internal. But of course, the behavior shows if there is friendliness, helpfulness, faithfulness, and so on. And this must be taught to the child. So, and then of course, put again to the test to see if it's a just lip service, an outside thing, or it's really internal thing. So, where to start? Where should education start? Where should I start? Which knowledge do the parents need first? And I think there is one knowledge that needs to be first. A little baby is born. Then this little baby, you must know how it works. You must know how it's built up, how it's structured. Now you know general things. It has a hand, it has hands, and all those. But how does it really work? How does all things function together? That doesn't fall just out of nothing. You should know those things. And by what power does the baby work? Is it food or is it something else? What are the additional needs in order to work well? This kind of information, I think, needs to be first. I need to have this information first. So that in order to know how to deal with the little child as well as with the growing child and also the adult. These are so general things. This every parent need to teach its child. But unfortunately, this is not taught. In school not, and in homeschool not. And so if the fundament, the basics are missing, whatever you build on is not really efficient. So let's look now to the two types of information, the two types of knowledge that we need to know in order to help our child. So that is the self-explanation, the self-evident information. It requires no interpretation. It only requires to study, to look to it. There are objects, structure, functions, means. All these things are self-evident. And when we look to the laws of nature, they are self-evident as well. This must be known. This must be learned. I have learned so much from nature. if I would not go almost every day out and I look and I talk to the Creator and I say, teach me, how do you did this? How did you make this? How does it function? These things must be known because they never change. They're always the same. You see, I have some cherry trees around in the way we live, and I know now for years the trees. I know exactly which tree tastes how it tastes, and it's amazing. They taste every year. The same tree has the same type of cherries. Yes? And so I know exactly what to expect. Now I saw that sometimes when there is drought, there's not much rain, the cherries are small. But when there is enough rain, they are big. And so you see things. Those are very helpful. If children are not able to learn in nature, then they might miss the most important things. But even when they have not so much gone out into nature, parents can still teach them these things. But without nature, there can be no education that is going to be successful. And then there is an information that we must interpret. Those are images, words, gestures, action. There are books, studies, experiments, observations, thesis, hypothesis, and the religious books, the Bible. They need interpretation. They have many meanings. Yes, you can extract from one word a lot of information. And if you have no right means of interpretation, then you might get very, very wrong. So this is unfortunately the most information that parents want to teach their children, because they themselves find themselves here. And Christians teach their children the Bible stories, but what if they interpret those stories the wrong way? So, you see, you need a means in order to believe that information as to be truth. So, the known information that you learn, you don't need to believe because it's self-evident. That what is not self-evident, everyone must believe. It's not it is an action of the human mind. It cannot introduce any information except by faith into those things that needs to be interpreted. And we'll look to that even more specific in the coming lectures. So, looking to that, what we need to interpret, the books and the Bible and other things, we need to have a clear mean by which we interpret those things. So there is language, there is grammar, culture, the interpretation of scientists, experts, scholars, psychologists, the opinion of the members of the family, and your own estimation. All this are subjective means. They're very, very common, but if you study and look to these things from this side, then whatever you then take in as your faith is purely blind, because it's based on estimation, on wishful thinking, on extrapolation, on statistics, and so on. And none of them are objective. They're all subjective, because you can interpret them like you want. You can twist them according to how you like them. And that's one of the most difficult things we have today, because people look to all this, including the religious books, by this way of taking out information. And so they can never have a clear foundation or understanding of what is meant in the books they read. I would suggest objective means of interpretation, and those are the laws of nature, because they're immutable. When you read something, when you need to take out that meaning, you say, okay, is this according to the law? How does it work? Does the law permit this way of working? And if you see that the law does not permit that, then you can say, aha, I must understand this way, or this cannot be understood except this way, how it was meant, because you put your interpretation, your faith on something that is unchangeable. And what is also unchangeable is the human being, our construction, the way we work, our structure, all the functions. You see, there is no contradiction in the human beings. There are needs that are absolutely fixed, spiritual ones and physical needs, all unchangeable. And actually, why do we read? And why do we need information? Because they give us food for our mind. And if we take that food in without an objective evaluation of what is meant, we are going always to be blind. So real faith, when you interpret and you extract information wherever you do it, and you base it on the unchanging laws of nature and the way the human being is built, you will go well. So these are two things that everyone needs to understand. The parents need to know how to teach the child, on what it bases its understanding. You read a story with the child, and then when it's a little bit older, of course, when you can have a dialogue with the child, and then you want to know, what did it understand from it? And then you will see its understanding, and then you analyze and say, okay, let's see, by which means did you come to this conclusion of what you read? What was it that you used in order to come to this conclusion? You see, there are many stories about animals which are not true. And then when a child reads them, it thinks it is truth, because the mind was so made it can only accept and take in truth. Then you might be surprised when the laws of nature contradict the story. And so we must help the children to use their minds in a way to put their understanding of what they extract from what they read and the stories they hear, because children like stories, to see, do they evaluate them? Do they incorporate them according to the truth or according to blindness? What do they use as means for understanding? But how will you do that to help the child if you yourself don't know how to evaluate a story? If you yourself use the subjective means and lack the objective ones. So it makes great joy to read books that have a content from where you can learn, extracting the content by a real mean, by an objective means, not by a subjective one. So let's look to that thing that explains itself. There are 5 things in the human being that will help us to understand ourselves, because these have no alternative. They explain themselves. The human being, its structure and function is self-explaining. You just need to know it. You don't need to, there's no interpretation possible. Like you cannot interpret a object, any device. So the human being is a very complex individual, which is built according to a structure and a function which is identical in all human beings. Then you need to know, where is the power source of this human being? By which power do I move my hand? You see, if a child asks you and says, how can I move my finger? How does that work? You need to know by what energy you move your finger. How you do that. How it works. I believe those are basic things that you can know. Usually when I ask once in a seminar, it was a child right in the front, and said, by what thing do you work? What's moving you around? And you know what the child answered? He said, food. I said, food? How come that food can move you around? Can food make the moving? It's never possible. But you see, if you don't know what is the function of food in the human being, yes, food makes that possible, but it doesn't do it. It is just a raw material. It's just that sustains the function. And if you don't know the law of everything in nature, you know nothing. And the child should know this most basic things, which have no change in all of them. So I so much want to encourage every parent to understand themselves, understand these basic things, in order to teach the child that when it is asked, by what do you function? I think it's one of the most important questions that needs to be answered. By what do I do what I do? Then the child would say, okay, that's it. But even if I ask adults, by what do they function? They think it's food. Well, this is a pure ignorance of the laws of anything that functions on earth. So let us look first to the law and then come back to the function. So this universe is built on 2 pillars. I call it the fundamental law of everything. And these 2 pillars are non-changeable, and they apply to everything. They're all comprehensible. There is nothing from the smallest atom to the biggest structure, you could say the complex structure of the human being, that does not work according to this law, and that not every element works according to this law. So nothing can exist and function from itself. there is a total dependency on energy and raw material. Two things, two dependencies. And we'll see the difference of them. So there must be a taking, we can call it cause, or an entrance, an input. So something must be taken in, because it cannot exist and function from itself. Not a child. Nothing. This finger cannot bow itself from no input. This is the first pillar. Nothing can exist and function from itself. And then the second pillar is nothing was made for itself or himself. So this finger doesn't work for itself. You see, when it pushes the button, it doesn't do something for itself. Everything it does for giving something, for doing an effect, that is the output, that is the exit. One of the most important things to understand, it's so simple, yet so profound. This law helped me in my practice to understand humanity, to understand, and how can I say, it's fascinating. It is so simple, and you can apply it to everything. It is infinite in its application, because there is nothing, or we could say it's everything works according to it. This device doesn't work for itself, but it takes something in order to give. This hand does something because it must give. This is output, not input. So we come back to this law, but I want to pause so that we can see that if we could make our children understand that they cannot exist from themselves and that they were not made for themselves. We will see those are the most decisive things to learn. They are the basis of the basis. Then they will drive their lives and will be happy and fulfilled. But if they are not built, if your education is not built on something that is unchangeable, you cannot interpret it. It is comprehensive. It includes everything, and it is simple. You see, I so like simplicity. But simplicity goes into the deepest thing of the deepest. The deeper you are, the more simple it becomes. But the more more to the foundation you are. And this is and must be the foundation of every education. To understand the fundamental law of everything in this universe is the basics things. Now, we, however, work according to it, but we will see if we don't understand it correctly, if we as humans have the ability to understand things, to have introspection, yes, to be able to explore things, to see ourselves. You see, the animal don't have that. You must have a tool by which you see, okay, how does that work? So this is the law that I speak since I discovered it in my practice. That's why I put all my presentations on this channel, the law of life, because this is the law of life, because there's nothing, not even the unliving things like the iPad's not a living thing, works according to this, from the smallest particle of an atom until you could say the most complex thing as a human being. It is all and works all according to this law. So this is not the only law. There are many secondary laws depending on circumstances. We don't go into them, but also those are important to understand, that under certain circumstances you have other results, but never this fundamental law changes. It's never changeable in no circumstances. It's always there. Other laws, like if you take temperature, on a certain temperature, things work this way or things work that way. That's a law that is dependent, or that law is governed by dependencies. But a fundamental law is always present, always independent on all circumstances. And it says that there must be a source where everything comes from. There must be a beginning of this circle where everything works. And we will explore that as well. So here, to enter a little bit more into the practical aspect, we have an engine and a plant. And they have something in common. They must work. They must do something. They must fulfill a purpose. In order to fulfill that purpose, they need at least two elements to be able to function, or we could say two different kind of elements. The elements can be more, but there are only two kinds of those elements. So first of all, you need that what generates, enables the function. So every seed, in order to germinate, needs first an electrical circuit in order to germinate. In order to take the savior out of the water, the nutrients that it needs, it first needs an electrical circuit. Exactly the same with the engine. And then it needs something that sustains that function, and that is what is being used. So the plant takes the water and takes other nutrients from the ground, and the engine takes the fuel and the oil and all those things that are needed that it should function properly. So if we take the human being, we have a stomach, and the stomach must function before you put in the food. So if the stomach is not functioning when you put in the food, it doesn't work. So there is an order of things. So you must have first the circuit and then the fuel. So we want to know that about the human being. So here is the baby, and we need to know how it works physically. Now physically, we know it must have an electrical current. It's by the electrical current that it moves and opens the eyes and breathes. And because that generates the function. But it cannot function only with the electrical current. It needs chemistry in order to sustain the function. That's why it breatheth, and it drinks, and it feeds itself. And of course, you put it in to the sun and heat. So those are things that sustain the function. And this is most important to understand the physiological thing. It's simple. The body needs two things. It needs that electrical circuit, and it needs that which is the fuel, the oxygen, the water, the food. But I cannot do this with food. I can do this only with electricity, but food makes it possible to do it. That's most important. Those are these two needs. And now we know from where we take the oxygen, the water, the food, the sunlight, and so on. But the question is, where does the electrical impulse come from? So this electrical impulse that moves my hand or moves my body, where does it come from? Because that is first, before you take in your breath. And you should know where is the switch. How you do it. And by what means is the switch turned on? Now, is the child just a physical thing? Does it just need to put it in to plug it in into a power source and give him oxygen and water? That's why we need to know how does that work? So everyone knows that the child needs love. And now the question is, of course, where is the love tank? That is, where do I have that what is needed in order to fulfill the child's need of love? So, what comes first? Love or oxygen? What is the order of things? And if you don't know the order, we are really confused. And I've been in families where parents don't know the order. I was in one family once, and they had I think he was already 5 or 6 years old, a child, but he protested to eat. And he only ate when mother took the spoon and gave him into his mouth. And I said, how does that work? He has 2 hands. He can move them. Why is he not eating by himself at the age of 5 or 6 years old? And then I take the story. And the history is that this child, in some countries, it's very early, at the age of 3, they put them in school. And some people just stay 6 months home, or even 6 weeks, or even switch and put the father instead of the mother, because the mother has a better job, and so the father takes the child care in his hand. Can we change nature? Can we switch the sources? It's not possible. And so parents think if they give food to the child, if they dress them so that they are not freezing, if they feed the physical things, the child will develop well. You see, parents put very great emphasis on wash your hands, brush your teeth, dress well, don't forget your cap when it's outside cold. They do all those kind of things, forgetting that those are secondary, not primary. And if you switch the order, you won't avail nothing in your education. you must know the order. You must know what comes first. And the child's behavior in this family shows that the neglect of his mother's being home, the neglect that the mother should know that love comes before food, would have changed everything. We are not aware what really matters because we are ignorant of the plain functions that were set in our being. No one can change that. The engine will not take the gas before you don't switch the key. Before the electrical current is not there, the gas cannot be taken in, or any power that is used for that engine. So we have something that initiates everything, and the other thing is used. And that's an order of things. You cannot switch them in, because if you switch them, it breaks. And children break if we don't know that love comes before food. We think when we just provide the food for our children, and we just provide a good environment for them and provide good schools, we have reached our goal in education. It's not possible. It's impossible. So, children will always protest. And they protest from very early childhood. There was a father, he came in my practice with a baby of 1 year old. And he said the baby has fever. And he had been 3 weeks ago, it had fever also. And he had been to the emergency and they hurt the child and put him in a IV fluid because it had fever, and they found out that the child was dehydrated. He did not drink. And then he came to me and said, I want to check if something in the ear, nose, throat area is there that makes the fever. And I looked at the child, I consulted it. There were no ear infection, no nose running, no nothing that you could visibly see that there is something that lacks. And then, you see, it's always very suspect when a father comes to the doctor with a child. Because usually at the age of 1 year, it's the mother. But where is the mother? Why is this child just with the father? The child protests to drink. I said to the man, why don't you give him more to drink? And he said, well, I don't want to force the child to not drink. Now, on one side, he was correct. Force is not the right method. But is it not force when you put an IV needle to put a fluid in? We must sustain life, yes. But we must find out the protest of the child, why it does not eat or why it does not drink it at the age of 1 year old. And why it makes the fever. See, where is the love tank of the child? Where is that? What is first? It is such a great ignorance that I have to experience in my practice, that parents don't know the order of things in the lives, neither in their life nor in the life of their children. And how can they then educate well? There is so much emphasis in the whole medical world, I might make this, on the chemistry side of life. And there is almost no emphasis on the love side, which is a spiritual thing in life, that we will see generates the electricity. So the human body needs body things. It needs electricity and it needs chemistry in order to function well. But what makes that? Where is the switch? Where does the electrical impulse come from? Where is the need of love? Where is the love tank? How should a child understand and a mother understand to fill it up? You see, ignorance of the order is devastating. It's devastating. So, let's make it clear. Love comes before food. They're both necessary. You cannot neglect one for the other. So they are not in competition. They must be given both in the right way. But nevertheless, there is something that comes first. And we have that great example of our Creator when he was hungry and tempted in the desert after 40 days. And he was tempted to produce its own food, chemistry. His answer was very, very profound and revealing. He said, man does not live by bread alone. It means before bread comes something else. Before bread comes love. And the whole package of the needs, of the spiritual needs of a human being, which is righteousness and truth and liberty and so on. Understanding the body structure, the human structure, understanding what comes first is most important. A confusion in it will bring deep damage and will never grow. Another story, maybe a mother said to me that she was very upset with the in-laws because, you see, when the grandparents come to visit, they're more relaxed than the parents. And children use that. I know when we had visitors, I knew I could permit things to do, and mother would not punish me in front of the other ones because I was not appropriate to be beaten in front of the guests. So we permit ourselves more when we know that guests are there. So this is, I don't know how old child, it's 3 or 4 years old. And the mother has trained the child that it should eat in an order. There's first the bread and then the avocado, or whatever it is. I just give an example. And then the child says, no, I just eat the avocado, I don't want the bread. And then if parents say, well, avocado is not balanced food, so then they try to force the child to eat first the bread and then the avocado. So you leave the better behind. But you see, children are interesting. They might eat first what they like, and then what they don't like, they leave there. Who make them to like something and doesn't like something else? Should we all eat the same food? No. There's plenty of diversity in the food. But parents and mothers are sometimes not very paying attention that there comes something before food comes. And that is understanding. Understanding comes before food. And so the grandparents have understanding, and so the children like the grandparents because grandparents understand them. And then the mother is very confused and thinks that the grandparents are in competition to her. And so conflict arises. Because the grandparents say, well, let eat him only the avocado, it's fine. It has enough nutrients. But then mothers think, oh, she goes over my education. You see, a rigid education never was successful. Especially when you're rigid in something that the Creator didn't make to be rigid. He made 1,000 of trees and said, you can eat all of them, like what you like. Now, did he need to eat from everyone? Did God tell him, no, you need first this, and then first that, and then that? No. Now you'd say, okay, well, he was adult. Children don't know. Yes. Children don't know yet. But how can you train them best? With force or with understanding? Looking, where can I do things correctly? But mothers, unfortunately, have something in them. For the benefit of the children, they go beyond understanding. I was once sitting at a table in the morning, and in a family they had 3 children. The oldest was 17. And mother, like mothers do it, they cut the fruits in pieces so that everyone can take some pieces like he wants from the fruit platter. And in the end of the meal, there remained a few of those things. And as mothers observed, the 17 years old did not really enjoy the fruits. In order to make him to eat, she just took the rest of those things, the whole platter, and turned it in his plate. Say, you need some vitamins. Now you see, you do this with a 5-year-old child, you would say it's not appropriate there as well. It's never appropriate what mother did. Because she disrespected the child. Because of what? Because she ignores the order of things. And at what age should a child know what to eat and not? Would a mother say to her 17-year-old child, if it's in a normal mind, I say, should she not have done her job already finished to say, well, when you're 17, you eat whatever I taught you to eat, and now you're on your own? She can offer. She can ask, why do you not eat? There's conversation is always permitted. And the moment you do something that is disrespectful, you do more harm than he would ever eat a vitamin. You see, these little things bring great, great results if you don't understand them. So let's never forget the priority. Let's never forget the order. So we come to that, what we need to understand in a structure, the design of the human brain. Because evidently, from there, all things start. So we have a cortex, that's how it's called. It's the outside layer of the brain. And in that outside layer, you see it here, you know there are billions of nervous cells in both sides. Now this is an interesting anatomy, and it's very needed to learn why they are separated and how it works, even though they're separate. You see, I have here only one side of it. So we have here our nervous cells, and there are billions. This dendrites, they have 400,000 connections to other cells. So in this small layer, which is about 4 to 5 millimeter, the whole human body is put together. You must imagine it's like a cockpit of a plane. Every cord comes into the cockpit, because from there you push the buttons. We must understand the whole human being is governed from the cortex. So whatever the child does, physically, it starts here. You must bow it. And you bow this right finger from the left cortex. And you bow this left finger from the right cortex. So those are basic things that everyone learns in school, everyone needs to know as a parent, so that he understands where he has to work with the child. Where does the things come from? So here, the cortex, every nerve goes down into the body. And here in the center of the brain, you can see it here, we have that what science called limbic system. Here we have a lot of structures, I call them chemistry factories, which produce chemistry according to the electrical impulse that comes down the stream. But you see, the electrical impulse must come on a certain cord. These are billions of cords here, and since electrical current goes through them, they must be all isolated. So if they would not be isolated, then you have that what you experience when some persons have a multiple sclerosis element, where the isolation is gone, and then you have multiple movement, even though you wanted to move just the finger. So you cannot move certain things if the wires would not be unique. That is, they go exactly where they are directed to go. That's precise. In our body, everything works precisely. Everything works precisely. And the electrical impulse makes chemistry. So the limbic system comes always after the electrical impulse. And it gives, as we will see, a feedback to the cortex if the electrical impulse was correct. So there is a connection, a electrical and a chemistry. So this is how our body works. Chemistry, electricity, chemistry, and it all works in a circle, as we will see later on. And then, of course, the nerves then cross to the other side. That's why from this side I govern this, and from this side I govern this. And I make this a little bit more explained because some of the hearers might not know these things. And we have only connection between them here, but we don't have a connection on the input, on the starting point. And I ask myself, as a physician, why do we have that? And I came to understand because we come from two different parents. And we are 50-50. So we inherit half of our body from our father and half of our body from our mother. And yes, they become one, but interestingly that on the place where they begin, they're separated. Now the question is, what puts them into practice? What gives them the power to work? What is it? Where is the location of spiritual needs and where do thoughts come from? Because if the brain cannot make its own electricity, then we need to know, thinking, where does it arise? And unfortunately, in science, it is believed that the brain thinketh. Now, if the brain can think, then your finger can move. Then this has also thoughts in it and can think. There is no physical thing that can think. So, where do thoughts come from? Do I move this with a thought or not with a thought? Is a decision that makes me move or not? And where does that decision start? You see, how can we teach a child where his behavior comes from or to behave correctly if we don't know where behavior starts? And the behavior is the expression of a thinking process. It's a decision that one does or not. And so, if I don't know where that starts, can I explain ever to the child? When it comes and says, "Mom, I had a terrible dream." Where does this dream come from? I don't need to be a greatly educated scientist to answer that question. To answer the question, how things structurally work in your head. The process that is put into action is a complex one. Well, it might be infinite that I can move more fingers. The same time I move my vocal cords, my lips, my tongue, my breathing muscles, even my legs. Those are complex things, but nevertheless, they come from a very simple way of action. So there must be a clear answer of a parent to his child. What comes first? The moving of the finger or your decision? What is first? Where does the thing start? And I hope we all understand that the child and no human being can do anything before he thinks. Everything that works in our body is a decision of ourselves. And what do we do most? Is it not most that we think? Why then we put so less emphasis of understanding where thoughts arise from? Why do we not ask our children, how did you get to that result? And how can we not give an answer? When children get in that age when they start asking, and why is that so? And you give them an answer and say, and why is that so? That's a fantastic age, isn't it? They want to get to the beginning of things. And where do you stop as a parent? When do you say, I don't know? As a parent, you should know. Because it is possible to know. It is just the lack of study, the lack of that we are not looking to those things that matter, that we don't advance in our education work. The most important question to answer is, where do thoughts come from? Where do they arise? What do they do? You see, those things you don't find in any school, not even in medical school. Why not? Why is that what a human being does most neglected? You want to teach your child self-control. How can you teach self-control if you don't know where self-control or no self-control comes from? All that we have, even in our psychology therapies, is cognitive behavior therapy. That is, we want to change behavior without understanding where it comes from. We do not breathe, we do not eat, we do not sleep, we do not drink in our life, or let's say in 1 hour. As we think in that same hour 10 times, 1,000 times more than we do all those other things. When I first was starting in my medical practice, I was wondering of one thing. And I said, how did I never learn in medical school where thoughts are coming from? Why did it not even was interested? Why did I go through school just blind, looking to, anatomy, physiology, but never asking, where does that start? Where does my thoughts coming from, my fears, my joy, everything I experience, where is the origin of it? To ignore in education that which is most essential brings the world to what it is today. We have a sick world. We have an uneducated, as we could say, children. And even those who have given their best in their families have failed because they ignored the essence of the human being, that is what it makes most, the way it thinks, how it thinks, and how things come up into the body. So ignorance pays a price. It's a terrible price. In his book, God says, my people is dying because of lack of knowledge. Friends, if there is something that is lacking today in everywhere in society, in the world. It is the knowledge of ourselves, the way we were put together, the way we function. It is total ignorance. Total ignorance. Because we have been focusing on the feel, that is, on food, on chemical things, neglecting completely almost the spiritual ones, or putting them aside. Every parent needs to know the need of love, of freedom, of respect, of righteousness, of justice comes before oxygen and water and food and antioxidants or whatever you think. So we must have a balanced education. We cannot put something that is secondary first and that which is first secondary. We cannot ignore the fact that there are things that come before the other ones. That is education, is order. And we must know what comes first and what comes second. Switching them is terrible. It's terrible. It's just an example when parents, father stays home and father goes to work. You know what happens with those children? They're sick. And they're sickly. Why? And they will bring up, sooner or later, a behavior change. Why? Because you don't know when. Now, you see, when you put a seed, you don't see immediately what the result is. You know, you put a grain in, it takes a few months that it comes out to see what you have sown. And so it happens that that parents put a seed in the early childhood, and when it comes puberty, or they are at the age of 13 or even below, you find out that there is grown something that you didn't know. But that what grows at the age of 13 had a cause in something that you saw. And even if it was just neglect, it's still a seed that is there that will bring fruit. So what do we want to educate? We must educate the child. We must educate that child knows how it works. And in order to educate it correctly, to ignore how this works and I want to use it, for it finally lead to that place that I cannot use anymore. And if a child doesn't know how it works, and it doesn't know the order of things in its life, then how can it ever govern itself correctly? So we want to make a difference in this life. See, I do these seminars, I give my lectures. I have a purpose. I want to go against the trend of ignorance of things that are essential. It doesn't matter how good meaning we are. Ignorance will bring the result of ignorance. Because the laws of nature that are governed by the one that created all things will never change. What you sow, you will reap. And every man, what he sows, he will reap. So let us put a foundation so that our seed putting will bring a good result. So it's not enough to be well-intentioned. It's not enough to be, for some parents, religious. It's not enough to, I would say, pray like this mother did. We must know how things work. That's why we have the capacity of understanding. And only that makes us to educate children intelligently. I mean, so that they can know what they do. An animal educates its children by instinct, and they follow. But humans must be conscious of what they do. They must prepare. They must know when they do what they do. So I hope this was an introduction of this first hour. And even it was very theoretical. Without this clear understanding, whatever we would build on, whatever information we would bring in, would not last. It will float away. That's why let us build in this 5 more coming seminars a foundation with a clear content and with a knowledge that is unchangeable and all understandable. Looking forward to our next hours. And of course, if there are questions, we will take those questions, and there will be also hours where we will answer them.